There's a narrative out there at the moment which makes me very nervous. It's this idea that young women, particularly, need to feel afraid wherever they go, that um, in whatever situation they don't have any power. And they're saying that this is what is leading to this domestic violence crisis that we're having, not just in Australia, but across the world. It makes me nervous because I have two daughters and I have always taught them to be strong, not afraid, careful, aware, but never afraid. I went and sat down with both of them just the other day and I said, so I need to know, do you feel afraid when you walk out the front door? Like, do you feel like afraid of men? Sure, there's anxiety and this sort of thing. And both my daughters were like, no, why would we be afraid of men? Now, obviously, I've taught them to be careful. I've taught them not to go into situations that are going to be dangerous. When my daughter goes out for a night, I always remind her before she goes, don't accept a drink from anybody but a bartender. If somebody wants to buy you a drink, get the bartender to hand it to you first. Don't, even if you're standing right there, don't let him hand you the drink. And even more than that, don't accept a drink from a stranger. um, I'm going to be talking as a father, clearly, and not as a woman. But I feel like this is something that needs to be said in this climate of what I believe is teaching young women to be afraid. Let's dive in and see what happens. Welcome to Shattered the Podcast. STP is the story of my journey from the depths of mental illness to a place where I could live again. Okie doke. Domestic violence touched our family recently. It was something that one of my daughters watched. She saw domestic violence happen, not to her, but to a friend of hers. And I can honestly say, before this moment, domestic violence has not really touched us in a personal way. I've seen it in other couples. I've seen it in other situations. I've even intervened. Me and my brothers have intervened, and a guy that was beating up his girlfriend or wife in his house. And we were brought up that that was unacceptable. You never touch a woman. But this incident brought home to me the fact that domestic violence is real, even though it's not in my sphere of influence. Now, I have seen people in situations that I'm convinced were domestic violence, and to my shame, I didn't step in. And it was this weird one. It was this dude that was just completely inconsiderate of his wife. And I showed up at the work one day and she was sitting out the front in the car and it was pretty hot. And she'd been there for a little while. And I said, mate, what are you doing? Why don't you come inside in the aircon? She goes, oh, I'm just waiting for my husband. He told me to wait in the car. And that jarred me. Like, he told you to wait in the car? And I said, well, screw that, man. Just either drive yourself to work or come inside. She didn't. She stayed in the car. And then in a conversation a couple of years later, she was feeling like she needed to convince me that she was living in a domestic violence situation. And I was able to say, no, well, no, I saw what I thought was domestic violence. And I should have spoken up. I should have said something. And I don't know whether I've apologized to her or not. I hope I have. My memory's not what it used to be. Here's where I come down on domestic violence, though. I grew up around incredibly strong women. My mother is a force of nature. Very, very different to my wife, who is also an astoundingly strong woman. Each of them in their different ways. Mum is direct. She's in your face. You know what she likes. You know what she doesn't like. You know what she can tolerate. You know what she won't. And she will stand up for her beliefs no matter what. My wife will do that, but it's not as demonstrative as my mum. But it is iron. If you mess with her family, you are done. If you step out of line at work, if you're a bloke and you make a joke that's inappropriate, she'll stomp all over him. These are the women that I'm used to being around. And these are the women that I expected my daughters to be. And I still expect them to be. I expect them to know their own minds. I expect them to know that they are powerful, that they are not weak. And to the best of my ability, I've tried to teach them that a partner is not just somebody that you have the ooh-la-las for. You need to be aware of who your partner is. And if your partner, prospective partner, in any way acts in a way that you find detrimental or wrong, then that person's wiped. So, if a boyfriend gets a bit carried away and he's shouting a bit, my daughter told me about it. I said, well, what are you going to do? And she said, I've told him if I ever hear that again, we're done. And to the best of my knowledge, he's never done that again. A few years ago, I was in a park with an American, and this was in Australia. And in this park, my kids go free range. We show up at the park, we set up a spot, and then the kids just went. And I didn't worry about them for 1 second. And we'd been to this park tens of times, 50s of times, multiple times, lots of times. And never once had I ever been concerned or afraid for my children. Yes, I was always within shouting distance. And yes, we would pop our heads up and just, okay, are they still alive? Good. Are they staying away from the water? If they're going in the water, they let us know and we'll be there. But that's how it was at this park. And we went with an American woman, and she turned to me, and my kids just bolted. And her daughter asked if she could go and play on a play set. Asked her mum. And the mum turned to me and said, Mark, is that okay? I'm like, free park. You can do whatever you want. And she said, no, will she be safe? And I said, safe from what? And she said, well, will she be kidnapped? Staggered me that was her reality, that she could not just go to a park. Now, admittedly, if it was my first time in a park and I didn't know the people that were there, yeah, I would be all over my kids. I don't know the situation. But when you're with a group of families and the kids are all together and the kids are running around and playing, and one of the people in that group is, are they safe? Are they going to get kidnapped? And that was like a legit fear. I kind of went, no. And she goes, no, I'm serious. I need to know. And I said, well, mate, I wouldn't bring you to a park where your kids could get kidnapped, would I? This is my fear of the narrative at the moment. This narrative that, it even came out in that stupid, I wish I didn't watch it, but that Barbie movie. So many messages in there that I was just like, what? She comes in the real world and she's like, I'm just afraid and I don't know why. And it's like, well, I don't think that would be a natural fear. That's learnt. And the thing that the movie says to young girls is, this is reality. You need to be afraid because that's the way that the world is. Men are evil and predators, and women are targets. And I can't agree with that. I can't have that narrative going to my daughters. I need my daughters to know that they are powerful, that they are strong, and they can walk around this world unafraid. That being said, they need to be aware. When I was young, I used to love going dancing, used to love going to clubs. But every time I went, some morons would try and pick a fight with me. Didn't like my dancing, didn't like the way I was dressed, whatever. I was a big lad, and fellas just used to try and pick me. So I just stopped going to clubs. I realized that it was not safe. I mean, I could, and I could put all these extra security things in place, go with lots of mates, do this, do that, but it just wasn't worth it in the end. Why put yourself in a situation where you are going to be unsafe? And that's what I want to teach my daughters. That's what I want them to learn, is that I need them to be aware of their situations, but never terrified, never afraid. I just, I'm so concerned that in our desperation to protect vulnerable women, we're chucking all women under the bus. We're saying you need to be afraid. This is a society in which women need to be afraid, and I don't think they have to. They have to be aware. They have to make the right choices, but we all do. And this is the other side of the coin. I grew up with a deathly fear of my father, of disappointing him, doing the wrong thing. And one of the worst things that you could do is disrespect my mum or even hit a woman. And my dad's 70 odd years old. I'm afraid that if he ever heard that I hit my daughters or my wife, he would show up at the front door and he would beat the tar out of me. And he's 70 years old, and I'm still afraid that he'd figure out a way to do that. Is that why I respect women? No. It's because I saw him love and respect his wife. And that's what I've taught my son to do. There is nobody in this house that's more important than their mum. And in a close second is his sisters. His job is to make sure that in every situation they are loved, they are cared for, and they are respected. And as soon as somebody disrespects them or shows them something that's inappropriate, some kind of behavior, my son is in there. A situation happened a couple of weeks ago. My daughter was ill, and a guy came to visit her, and then he got her to drop her home. And what I loved is my son went, "What the hell? She was sick. Why was she driving him home? Why wouldn't she put him on a bus?" Now, what I love about that is it's love and respect. Now, bottom line though is I've taught my daughter to be strong and make her own decisions. She would not have done that if she didn't want to. But still, at the same time, we were like, well, why did that guy beg you to drive him home? Look, I know that the world can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. We don't have to. You know, my wife the other day was talking about my 15-year-old son. He's just about 6 foot tall. He's a big, solid lad. And he was out late. And she said, "What if somebody drugs and kidnaps him?" And I kind of laughed and looked at her face, and she was serious. And I just had to say, well, is that really something that we hear about on the news all the time? Young men being kidnapped, and yeah, there's exceptions. As we said last week, domestic violence is never okay. There's never an excuse for it. Touching a woman makes you not a man. Touching a woman, hurting a woman, physically abusing a woman is disgusting. And you deserve the worst punishment that we can devise. But in the same vein, when you go so far down a problem, these guys need help. They need to have somebody like my father or my son sit them down and go, this behavior is not acceptable. This behavior is not on. It's the men that need to change. It's not the women who need to be afraid. Protect your daughters by making them or training them or helping them to be strong women. Women who will not take disrespect, abuse. And I don't know if that's politically correct. I don't care. I want the women in my life to feel safe. I want them to feel protected by me, but I want them to feel like they can walk down the street and know that they don't need to be afraid. Aware, cautious, but not afraid. I don't know. I may have kicked a can of bees all over the place, but for me, it comes down to that. We need respectful men. We need strong women. I think that's the only way that we can get around this whole domestic violence thing. One last thing. I would never, ever touch my wife in violence. It's not because she's a woman. It's not because I'm afraid of my dad. It's because she's my best friend. Would you punch your best friend and expect them to stay your friend? Of course you wouldn't. I hope that one day, if my daughters marry, if they end up with kids and a family, that they live knowing that they are respected and treasured and that they've married their best friend. I'm going to leave it there. I'll talk to you next week. Bye for now. Hey, thanks for joining us on Shattered the Podcast. I'm Mark. Special thanks to my producer, Meredith Brosnan, and also to Torian, Kevin, and Lorraine. And we can't forget the amazing band Adelaide, who let us use their song as our theme. For more information, check us out on all your socials, STP Shattered the Podcast.